She was just trying to calm down a scared little girl with soap bubbles in her empty restaurant at 3 in the morning. What the waitress didn't know was that the child's father, watching from the dark, was the most powerful vampire king alive, and he just decided she belonged to him. The clock above Mel's restaurant read 2:47 a.m. when Emma Rodriguez wiped down the same coffee-stained counter for the 3rd time that hour. Rain pounded against the windows of the roadside restaurant, and the bright lights flickered like dying fireflies. Only 2 customers were left. Old Frank drinking his black coffee at table 6, and a truck driver named Billy, who had been staring at his uneaten pie for 20 minutes. Emma tucked a piece of dark hair behind her ear and sighed. 3 years of late shifts at this forgotten part of the highway between nowhere and nothing, and she still couldn't get used to the strange quiet that settled over the place after midnight. The restaurant felt like a ship floating in an ocean of darkness, with only the occasional big truck's headlights cutting through the gloom. She was reaching for the coffee pot when the front door burst open. A small figure stumbled inside, soaked from the rain and shaking like a leaf in a storm. Emma's breath caught in her throat. It was a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with bright blonde hair stuck to her pale face. Her clothes, a white dress that looked expensive even though it was torn and muddy, clung to her tiny body. But it was her eyes that made Emma's heart skip a beat. They were the palest blue she'd ever seen, almost silver, and filled with a terror so deep it seemed ancient. The girl stood in the doorway, water pooling at her bare feet, not making a sound, just staring. Frank's coffee cup clattered against his saucer. Jesus Christ, where did she come from? Billy pushed back from his table, his chair scraping against the floor. Kid looks half dead. Should we call someone? Emma moved around the counter slowly, the way she'd approach a hurt animal. Something about the child made her skin prickle with worry, but not fear, protective feelings. The girl's lips were colored blue, and her small hands shook as they grabbed at her dress. Hey there, sweetheart, Emma said softly, kneeling down to the girl's eye level. Are you okay? Are you hurt? The child's silver eyes locked onto Emma's brown ones, but she didn't speak. Didn't even seem to breathe. Where are your parents, honey? Emma tried again, reaching out slowly. Did someone hurt you? The moment Emma's fingers touched the girl's ice-cold hand, the child jumped back violently and let out a sound that made everyone in the restaurant freeze. It wasn't quite a scream. It was something raw, like a wounded animal caught in a trap. The bright lights above them flickered more violently, and Frank's coffee mug shattered on the floor. What the hell? Billy started, but Emma shot him a sharp look. The girl's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Only that terrible silent scream of panic. Her whole body shook now, and Emma realized with growing alarm that the child was having some kind of breakdown. Emma's mind raced. She'd seen trauma before. Her younger brother had panic attacks after their father left. But this felt different, deeper, like the girl had seen something that no child should ever see. Without thinking, Emma reached into her apron pocket and pulled out something that had gotten her through countless late-night shifts when boredom threatened to drive her crazy. A small bottle of bubble solution with a tiny wand attached to the cap. Look at this, baby girl, Emma whispered, opening the bottle. Watch! She dipped the plastic wand into the soapy liquid and blew gently. A stream of rainbow-colored bubbles floated through the air, catching the restaurant's harsh light and turning it into something magical. They drifted around the girl's face like tiny rainbow planets, popping softly against her cheeks and hair. The change was instant and amazing. The girl's panicked breathing slowed. Her silver eyes widened with wonder instead of terror, and she lifted one shaking hand to touch a bubble before it burst against her palm. A hint of a smile crossed her lips, the first sign of being normal that Emma had seen from her. Pretty, aren't they? Emma blew another batch, and the girl actually stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the wet floor. My mom used to make these for me when I was scared. They carried wishes up to heaven. The girl reached for more bubbles, her movements becoming less wild, more childlike. She was still pale as moonlight and cold as winter, but the raw terror had faded from her eyes. Emma kept blowing bubbles, creating a small cloud of shimmering spheres that seemed to glow in the restaurant's bright haze. That's when the temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Emma's breath misted in front of her face. The windows fogged over completely, and every single light in the restaurant flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in, covering everything in a strange red glow that made the whole place look like the inside of a beating heart. Frank was on his feet, fumbling for his phone. Power line must have gone down in the storm. No. Billy's voice was barely a whisper. He was staring at the front windows, his face white as chalk. "Look outside." Emma followed his gaze and felt her blood turn to ice water. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could see shapes moving in the parking lot. Not cars, people, at least a dozen of them standing perfectly still in the downpour like statues. They wore dark clothes that seemed to absorb what little light remained, and they didn't move the way normal people moved. They were too smooth, too graceful, like hunters who'd never known what it felt like to be prey. And they were all facing the restaurant. The little girl beside Emma suddenly went stiff. She grabbed Emma's hand with fingers like ice, and when Emma looked down, the child's silver eyes had gone completely white. No pupils, no iris, just blank, terrified white. The front door opened with a soft chime that sounded like a funeral bell in the silence. A man stepped inside, and Emma's heart nearly stopped beating altogether. He had to be at least 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the emergency lighting behind him. His hair was black as midnight and swept back from a face that looked like it had been carved from marble by a master sculptor. All sharp angles and classical beauty that belonged in a museum, not a roadside restaurant. But it was his eyes that made Emma's knees weak. They were the same pale silver as the little girl's, but ancient in a way that spoke of centuries, not years. He wore a long black coat that looked like it cost more than Emma made in 6 months, and it didn't have a single drop of rain on it, despite the storm raging outside. When he moved, it was with the hunting grace she'd seen in the shapes beyond the windows, like gravity affected him differently than it did everyone else. The man's silver gaze swept across the restaurant, taking in Frank cowering by his table, Billy pressed against the back wall, and finally settling on Emma and the little girl. When his eyes locked onto Emma's, she felt something shift in the air around them. Like the moment before lightning strikes. "Who?" he said, his voice carrying a faint accent she couldn't place and a coldness that made the temperature drop another 10 degrees. "Has been touching my daughter?" Silence crashed down on the restaurant like a heavy blanket. Emma could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, could feel the little girl's icy fingers tightening around her hand with desperate strength. Frank had gone so pale he looked like he might faint, while Billy pressed himself further against the wall, as if he could somehow disappear into it. The man, this creature who called himself the child's father, stood in the doorway like a dark angel of death. Behind him, Emma could see more figures filing silently into the parking lot. They moved with that same unnatural grace, spreading out to surround the building like pieces on a chessboard. Every exit, every escape route was being blocked one by one. Emma's mouth went dry. Whatever these people were, they weren't human. The way they moved, the way the temperature kept dropping, the way the very air seemed to bend around them. It was wrong in ways her mind couldn't fully process. "I asked a question," the man said, stepping further into the restaurant. His boots made no sound on the floor, "and I expect an answer." His silver eyes swept over Frank, who immediately pointed a shaking finger at Emma. "Her. She's the one who was talking to the kid." "Frank?" Emma gasped, but she couldn't blame him. Terror had a way of turning people into cowards. The man's attention focused on Emma like a laser, and she felt exposed, vulnerable, as if he could see straight through to her soul. Those ancient eyes looked at everything, her wrinkled uniform, her work-worn hands, the way she naturally moved to shield the little girl behind her. "You touched what belongs to me," he said, his voice soft as velvet and twice as deadly. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Emma's fear spiked, but underneath it, anger began to burn. This child had been terrified, alone, soaked to the bone in the middle of the night. What kind of father let that happen? "She was scared," Emma said, her voice shaking but determined. "She was just a little girl who needed help. I wasn't going to hurt her." Something flickered across the man's perfect features. Surprise, maybe, that she'd found the courage to speak at all. Help? The word came out like he'd never heard it before. You think you were helping her? Look at her. Emma's protective feelings overrode her terror. She's terrified. She's freezing. She can't even speak. What was I supposed to do? Just ignore her? The man took another step closer, and Emma could smell something on him. Not cologne, but something wilder, more raw, like winter forests and old blood. You have no idea what she is, what I am. You've interfered with forces beyond your understanding. Little human. The way he said it made Emma's skin crawl, like she was a different species altogether. I don't care what you are, Emma said, surprising herself with her boldness. She's just a child. That's when the little girl did something that shocked everyone in the room, including her father. She let go of Emma's hand and stepped forward, wrapping her small arms around Emma's leg in a tight hug. Her silver eyes, no longer blank with terror, looked up at Emma with something that might have been thankfulness or love, or both. The man froze. For the first time since he'd entered the restaurant, his calm cracked. Emma watched emotions flicker across his marble features, confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been wonder. Lyra. His voice was different now, softer, almost vulnerable. Daughter. The little girl, Lyra, turned to look at her father, but she didn't let go of Emma's leg. Instead, she reached out with one small hand, making a gesture Emma didn't understand, but that clearly meant something to him. The man's silver eyes widened. He took a step back, then another, as if his daughter had physically pushed him. That's impossible. What? Emma asked, looking down at Lyra, who was now clinging to her with both arms. What's impossible? The man stared at his daughter for a long moment, something shifting in those ancient eyes. When he looked back at Emma, the deadly coldness was still there, but underneath it was something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or calculation. She hasn't spoken to anyone in 3 years, he said quietly. Hasn't touched anyone, hasn't trusted anyone. His gaze settled on Emma's face with new strength. Until you. Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the supernatural cold filling the restaurant. What are you talking about? Instead of answering, the man stepped closer, and Emma could see her own reflection in his silver eyes. What's your name, human? Emma, she whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. Emma. He said her name like he was tasting it. You will come with me. What? No. Emma tried to step back, but Lyra's arms around her leg held her in place. I can't just leave. I have a job. I have a life. You have nothing, he said with complete certainty. No family, no real friends. No one who would miss you if you disappeared tonight. His smile was sharp as a blade. Don't look so shocked. I know everything about everyone in this pathetic little town. Emma's blood ran cold because he was right. Completely, devastatingly right. My daughter has chosen you, he continued, his voice carrying the weight of a royal announcement. Therefore you will come with me. You will care for her. You will give her whatever comfort she seems to find in your presence. And if I refuse? His smile became something truly terrifying. All hunter, no humanity. Then you won't live long enough to regret the decision. Before Emma could protest further, Lyra tugged on her hand and pointed toward the door. The little girl's silver eyes held a plea that Emma couldn't ignore, even if she wanted to. The man gestured, and 2 of his companions entered the restaurant. They moved like shadows, coming to stand on either side of Emma, but not quite touching her. Gentlemen, escort our guest to the car. Wait. Emma tried to pull away, but Lyra held tight to her hand. I don't even know who you are. The man paused at the door, his black coat billowing around him like wings. When he turned back, his smile was all sharp edges and ancient power. Lord Cale Draven, he said with a slight bow that somehow managed to be mocking. And you, Emma Rodriguez, are about to discover that your simple little life has just become infinitely more complicated. The last thing Emma saw as she was swept out into the storm was Frank and Billy's terrified faces watching through the fogged windows. And then she was being guided toward a sleek black car that looked like it belonged in a movie about international spies. The night swallowed them whole. The car ride felt like going down into hell. Emma sat in the back seat between two of Cale's men, their presence as cold and heavy as tombstones. They didn't breathe. She was sure of it. She'd been watching for 20 minutes, and neither of their chests had risen or fallen once. Lyra sat across from her next to Cale, those silver eyes never leaving Emma's face, as if she feared Emma might disappear if she looked away. The landscape outside the dark windows grew wilder and more empty with each passing mile. They'd left the highway far behind, winding through narrower and narrower roads that seemed carved from the very darkness itself. Ancient trees pressed close on either side, their twisted branches creating a roof so thick that even the storm's lightning couldn't get through it. "Where are you taking me?" Emma finally managed to whisper. Cale didn't look up from the tablet he'd been scrolling through. "Home. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." Emma bit back her response. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But where could she go? Even if she could somehow escape these creatures, she was lost in the middle of nowhere with no phone, no car, and no idea which direction led back to civilization. After what felt like hours, the trees finally parted to reveal something that made Emma's breath catch in her throat. The Driven estate rose from the landscape like a Gothic cathedral built by fallen angels. It was massive, easily the size of a small hotel, with towering spires that disappeared into the storm clouds above. Every window glowed with warm golden light. But instead of appearing welcoming, it looked like the eyes of some great beast watching their approach. Gargoyles sat on the corners of the building, their stone faces twisted in eternal screams. "Jesus," Emma breathed. "He has no power here," Cale said without looking up. The car pulled up to a circular driveway made of black stone that reflected the lightning like glass. As soon as the engine died, figures began coming out from the estate's entrance. They moved in perfect rhythm, forming two lines that led to the massive front doors. "Servants," Cale explained, finally putting away his tablet. "They've been eager to meet the woman who calmed my daughter." Emma watched through the window as more figures appeared. At least 20 of them now, all dressed in dark formal wear that looked like it belonged to another century. But it was their eyes that made her stomach clench with fear. Every single one of them glowed with the same unnatural light she'd seen from Cale and Lyra. Amber, silver, deep red like fresh blood. "They're like you," Emma said, her voice barely audible. "Vampires," Cale confirmed casually, as if he was discussing the weather. "The oldest and most loyal of my bloodline. Some have served my family for centuries. Vampires." The word hit Emma like a physical blow. Part of her had suspected, but hearing it confirmed made everything real in a way that terrified her. These weren't just dangerous people. They were hunters who fed on human blood. The car door opened, and one of Cale's men gestured for her to exit. Emma's legs felt like jelly as she stepped onto the black stone, Lyra immediately taking her hand. The moment her feet touched the ground, every single servant dropped into a deep bow. "My lord," they spoke in unison, their voices creating an eerie harmony that echoed off the estate's walls. "Welcome home." Cale strode past them without acknowledgement, but Emma noticed how their glowing eyes tracked his every movement with something that looked like worship. He paused at the entrance, a doorway easily, 12 feet tall and carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. "Emma Rodriguez." His voice carried across the courtyard. "Welcome to Raven's Halt." The interior was even more overwhelming than the exterior. The entrance hall soared 3 stories high, with a chandelier made of what looked like black crystal casting dancing shadows on the walls. Oil paintings of severe-looking individuals with those same silver eyes lined the hallways, and Emma realized she was looking at generations of Cale's family. All of them had that same ageless hunting beauty. "The Draven bloodline," Cale said, noticing her stare. "We've ruled this territory for over 800 years. Territory? Everything within a 50-mile radius belongs to me. Every human, every business, every breath of air." His smile was sharp. "Including you now." They walked through hallways lined with tapestries that showed hunting scenes, though Emma had the sickening suspicion the prey in those images wasn't animals. Servants appeared and disappeared like ghosts, always bowing when they passed Cale, always watching Emma with curious, glowing eyes. Finally, they entered what looked like a library that belonged in a European castle. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, filled with ancient books, surrounded a fireplace, large enough to stand in. Cale gestured for Emma to sit in a leather chair that probably cost more than her car. "Do you know why my daughter was in your restaurant tonight?" Cale asked, settling into the chair across from her. Lyra climbed onto Emma's lap without hesitation, curling up like a small cat. "No. She was running from here, from me, from the safety I've spent years building around her." His silver eyes grew distant. 3 years ago, Lyra witnessed something that broke her mind. She hasn't spoken since. Hasn't allowed anyone to touch her. She screams if anyone but me comes near her. Emma looked down at the little girl in her arms, who was now playing with the bubbles Emma had blown earlier in her pocket. What did she see? Her mother's murder. The words hit Emma like ice water. She tightened her arms around Lyra protectively, understanding now why the child carried such deep trauma. "Lyra is not just my daughter," Cale continued, his voice growing harder. "She is the heir to the Draven bloodline, a princess among vampires. And there are those who would use her to destroy everything I've built. That's why she ran. She sensed danger. Her vampire instincts are strong, even if her mind is broken." Cale leaned forward, his eyes burning into Emma's. "But you calmed her. For the first time in 3 years, she trusts someone besides me. That makes you invaluable." Emma felt the trap closing around her. "What do you want from me? You will stay here. You will care for Lyra, comfort her, help her heal. You will be whatever she needs you to be." Cale's voice carried the weight of complete authority. "In return, you will live in luxury beyond your imagination. And if I refuse?" Cale stood, his imposing frame casting long shadows in the fireplace light. When he spoke, his voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than any shout. "You won't refuse, Emma, because you've already seen what Lyra becomes without you. A broken, terrified child lost in her own mind. And because deep down, you know you have nowhere else to go." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Your room is prepared. Lyra's chambers are connected to yours. The servants will provide anything you need." "Wait," Emma called as he reached the doorway. "What if I can't help her? What if I make things worse?" Lord Cale Draven turned back one final time, and his smile was colder than winter's heart. "Then pray you die quickly, Emma Rodriguez, because if you fail my daughter, if you betray the trust she's placed in you, you won't live long enough to regret it." The door closed behind him with the finality of a coffin lid, leaving Emma alone with a vampire princess and the growing realization that her simple life had just become a beautiful nightmare. 5 days passed like scenes from a dream Emma couldn't wake up from. Her room was larger than her entire apartment back home, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked gardens so perfectly maintained they looked like paintings. The bed was carved from dark wood and covered in silk that probably cost more than she made in a year. But despite the luxury, Emma felt like a bird in a golden cage. Lyra never left her side. The little girl followed Emma everywhere with the devotion of a shadow, those silver eyes constantly watching, constantly trusting. She didn't speak, not a single word, but she communicated in ways that broke Emma's heart and mended it all at once. A gentle tug on Emma's hand when she wanted to go somewhere, a small finger pointing at something that caught her interest, the way she would curl up in Emma's lap during the long afternoons, finally peaceful enough to sleep. It was the bubbles that worked the magic. Emma had asked one of the servants, a stern-faced woman named Celeste, whose eyes glowed amber in the dark, for bubble solution and plastic wands. Celeste had looked at her as if she'd requested dragon's blood. But within an hour, Emma had enough supplies to fill a toy store. The first time Lyra laughed was on the 3rd day. They were in the estate's conservatory, a glass-roofed paradise filled with flowers that bloomed in impossible colors. Emma sat cross-legged on the marble floor, blowing streams of bubbles that caught the afternoon sunlight and scattered it into tiny rainbows. Lyra chased them with the focused intensity of a hunter. But when one particularly large bubble landed on her nose and popped with the softest sound, she giggled. The laugh was like silver bells, pure and musical and so full of joy that Emma's eyes filled with tears. For a moment, Lyra wasn't a traumatized vampire princess or a pawn in some supernatural war. She was just a little girl playing with bubbles. "Again," Lyra whispered, her first word in 3 years coming out soft as a breath. Please. Emma blew bubbles until her cheeks ached, and Lyra's dress was damp with burst soap films. The little girl spun and danced, her platinum hair catching the light as she chased the shimmering spheres through the conservatory. Her laughter echoed off the glass walls, a sound so beautiful that even the flowers seemed to turn toward it. What Emma didn't notice was the figure watching from the shadows of the doorway. Cale stood perfectly still, his usually stern features soft with something that looked almost like wonder. The harsh lines around his silver eyes had smoothed, and for just a moment, he looked less like a vampire lord and more like a father watching his daughter play. Emma caught a glimpse of him when she turned to reach for more bubble solution, and the expression on his face made her chest tight with unexpected emotion. But by the time she blinked, he was gone, leaving only the faint scent of winter forests and the feeling that she'd witnessed something intensely private. The nights were when Emma heard things she wasn't supposed to hear. Vampire servants didn't sleep, she'd learned. They moved through the estate's hallways after midnight, their soft voices carrying conversations they thought no human could understand. But sound traveled strangely in Raven's Halt, and Emma's room was positioned perfectly to catch whispers from the servants' quarters below. The Crimson Court grows restless, she heard Celeste murmur to another servant on the 4th night. Lord Matthias believes the girl's trauma makes her weak, vulnerable. He's wrong, came the reply in a voice like grinding stone. The young mistress carries the pure bloodline. In the right hands, she could be turned against her father. Emma pressed herself against the floor, straining to hear more. The human complicates things, Celeste continued. Already the child shows signs of healing. If she recovers fully, she won't live that long. None of them will. The other voice held the coldness of grave dirt. Lord Matthias has been watching, waiting. The human has made the young mistress predictable. They know where to find her now. Emma's blood turned to ice. They were talking about Lyra, about her. Someone was planning to use their bond against them. When? Celeste asked. Soon. The new moon is in 3 days. Darkness will be complete, and Lord Cale will be at his weakest. The Crimson Court will strike then. Footsteps moved away, leaving Emma alone with the terrible knowledge that she'd brought danger down on the one person she'd come to care about most. The next morning, she watched Lyra more carefully, noticing details she'd missed before. How the little girl's fingers were always slightly cold, even in the warmest rooms. How her canine teeth were just a bit too sharp for a normal child. How she never seemed to eat regular food, though Celeste brought her strange mixtures that smelled of iron and herbs. Lyra was becoming more vampire with each passing day, her supernatural nature strengthening as her trauma healed, and Emma was helping it happen, nurturing the very power that made her so valuable to Cale's enemies. Emma. Lyra's voice was still a whisper, but she spoke more now, single words and short phrases that felt like gifts. They were in Emma's room, bubble wands and solution bottles scattered across the silk bedding. What is it, sweetheart? Are you going to leave? Like Mama did? Silver eyes wide with worry searched Emma's face. Emma's heart shattered. She pulled Lyra onto her lap, holding her close, breathing in the scent of moonlight and winter that clung to the little girl's hair. No, baby, I'm not going anywhere. But even as she spoke the words, Emma could feel the weight of the danger pressing down on them. The Crimson Court, whoever they were, would come for Lyra. And when they did, Emma would be caught in the middle of a war she didn't understand, fighting enemies she couldn't hope to defeat. She looked out the window at the darkening sky and realized that her presence at Raven's Halt hadn't saved Lyra from danger. It had painted a target on both their backs. The little girl who trusted her completely, who was finally learning to laugh and speak again, was about to become a weapon in a supernatural conflict that could destroy them all. The new moon was only 3 days away, and Emma had no idea how to protect the vampire princess who had become the daughter of her heart. The attack came at dawn on the 2nd day. Emma jolted awake to the sound of glass shattering somewhere in the estate's lower levels. For a moment, she thought it might be wind from another storm. But then she heard something that made her blood freeze. Screaming. Not human screaming, but something far more terrible. The sound of hunters in deadly combat. Lyra was already sitting up in the adjoining bed, her silver eyes wide with the same raw terror Emma had first seen in the restaurant. The little girl's supernatural senses had detected the danger before Emma's human ones even registered it. "Emma," Lyra whispered, her voice shaking. "They're here." More sounds reached them, running footsteps, doors breaking, and underneath it all, a sound like wet tearing that Emma's mind refused to identify. The estate's lights flickered, then went out completely, leaving them in the gray half-light of early morning. Emma was out of bed in an instant, grabbing Lyra and pulling her toward the window. What she saw in the courtyard below made her stomach drop. Dark figures moved across the grounds with inhuman speed, their forms blurring as they cut down Kale's servants. But these weren't the graceful, controlled movements she'd grown used to seeing from the Raven's Halt vampires. These attackers moved like rabid animals, all claws and fangs and mindless violence. "The Crimson Court," Lyra breathed, pressing her face against Emma's shoulder. "They've come for me." The bedroom door exploded inward, torn from its hinges like paper. A vampire Emma had never seen before stood in the doorway. Tall and lean, with eyes like burning coals and blood already staining his formal jacket. His gaze locked onto Lyra with naked hunger. "Princess," he hissed, his voice like scraping bone. "Lord Matthias sends his regards." Emma didn't think. She grabbed the nearest thing she could find, a heavy crystal vase, and hurled it at the vampire's head. It shattered against his skull with a satisfying crack, and while he staggered, Emma scooped up Lyra and ran. The hallways were chaos. Bodies, or what remained of them, littered the fancy carpets. Celeste lay crumpled against a wall, her amber eyes dim and lifeless. Other servants Emma had come to know were scattered like broken dolls, their formal uniforms torn and bloody. "This way," Lyra whispered urgently, tugging Emma toward what looked like a solid wall. But when the little girl pressed her hand against a carved rose in the woodwork, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow passage. "Secret tunnels," Lyra explained as they squeezed inside. "Papa showed me when I was little, for emergencies." The passage was barely wide enough for Emma's shoulders, and the darkness was complete. She could hear Lyra's rapid breathing ahead of her, could feel the little girl trembling, as sounds of battle echoed through the walls around them. Somewhere close by, something roared with inhuman rage, and the walls shook. They reached a small chamber carved from stone, probably used for storage centuries ago. A thin crack in the wall let in a sliver of light from the main hallway beyond. Emma pressed herself against it, trying to see what was happening. Kale's remaining guards were making a final stand at the main staircase. Emma recognized Marcus, the stern vampire who'd driven them from the restaurant, wielding what looked like a silver sword. He moved with deadly precision, cutting down attackers with centuries of skill behind each strike. But there were too many of them. "We need to keep quiet," Emma whispered to Lyra, who was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "Can you do that for me, baby girl?" Lyra nodded, but Emma could see the terror building in those silver eyes. The same blank panic that had consumed her at the restaurant was threatening to return. Emma reached into her pocket and pulled out the small bottle of bubble solution she'd taken to carrying everywhere. She unscrewed the cap and dipped the wand, then blew gently. Bubbles floated through the cramped space, their surfaces catching what little light filtered through the crack. Lyra's breathing slowed as she watched them drift and pop against the stone walls. Emma kept blowing, creating a small cloud of shimmering spheres that seemed to glow in the darkness. Through the crack, Emma saw something that made her heart stop. Marcus was fighting 3 vampires at once, his sword flashing like silver lightning. But behind him, creeping up the stairs with careful silence, was another figure Emma recognized. Victor, one of Kale's most trusted guards. Someone who'd bowed to Kale with apparent loyalty every single day. Victor raised a curved dagger, aiming for the space between Marcus's shoulder blades. Emma wanted to scream a warning, but any sound would give away their hiding place. She could only watch in horror as Victor drove the blade deep into Marcus's back. The loyal guard's eyes widened, in shock and betrayal before he crumbled to the floor. "Well, done?" said a voice like poisoned honey. A new vampire descended the stairs, tall and elegant, with silver hair and eyes like fresh blood. Lord Kale will be so disappointed to learn of his guard's treachery. Victor bowed deeply. Lord Matthias, the princess is here somewhere. The human took her when the attack began. Find them, Matthias commanded. The girl's trauma has made her powerful but unstable. Perfect for our purposes. And bring me the human's head. She's served her usefulness. Emma's blood turned to ice. The betrayal ran deeper than she'd imagined. Victor had been feeding information to the Crimson Court, probably for months. Every detail about Lyra's recovery, every weakness in the estate's defenses. That's when the temperature in the hallway dropped 30 degrees in a single second. The attacking vampires froze, their heads turning toward the main entrance with expressions of sudden raw fear. Even Matthias took a step back, his confident manner cracking. The front doors didn't open. They disintegrated. Lord Kale Draven walked through the ruined entrance like an avenging angel wrapped in shadows and winter wind. His formal clothes were torn and bloody, his silver hair wild from battle, and his eyes burned like twin stars gone supernova. Emma had never seen anything so beautiful or terrifying in her life. He moved through the attacking vampires like death itself, not fighting, executing. His bare hands tore through them as if they were made of paper, their ancient bodies crumbling to dust before they could even scream. Blood painted the walls in red arcs, and the air filled with the sound of bones snapping like kindling. In less than 30 seconds, a dozen of Matthias's vampires were nothing but ash on the marble floor. You dare? Kale's voice echoed with power that made the entire estate shake. Attack my home? Threaten my daughter? Matthias straightened, trying to regain his calm. The girl belongs to the old bloodlines, Kale. Your protection of her violates ancient law. Kale's hand closed around Matthias's throat, cutting off his words. You speak of ancient law? I am ancient law. But Victor chose that moment to run, slipping away toward a side passage while Kale was distracted. Emma wanted to shout, to warn Kale about the traitor's escape. But Lyra chose that moment to let out a small sob of fear. It was barely audible, but in the sudden silence following the battle, it might as well have been a scream. Kale's head snapped toward their hiding place, his burning eyes finding the crack in the wall. For a moment that stretched like forever, father and daughter stared at each other through the stone barrier. When Kale finally spoke, his voice was soft as falling snow and twice as cold. Come out, Emma. Both of you. It's over. Emma pushed open the hidden door, Lyra clinging to her leg as they stepped into the blood-soaked hallway. Kale stood among the destruction like a dark king looking over his conquered kingdom. Matthias's lifeless body was crumpled at his feet. This was what he truly was, Emma realized with crystal-clear clarity. Not the controlled aristocrat or the vulnerable father, but this, a creature of such devastating power that even other vampires feared him. When those burning silver eyes fixed on her face, Emma saw her own mortality reflected there. And for the first time since arriving at Raven's Halt, she truly understood what it meant to be human in a world of monsters. The estate fell silent, except for the soft powder of ash settling on marble floors. Kale stood among the destruction, his chest rising and falling with unnecessary breaths that spoke of barely controlled rage. Blood, not his own, stained his hands and clothes, and his silver eyes still burned with that terrifying inner fire that had reduced a dozen ancient vampires to dust. Papa! Lyra's voice was barely a whisper, but it seemed to cut through Kale's fury like a blade through silk. The burning in his eyes dimmed, replaced by something infinitely gentler as he looked at his daughter. I'm here, little star, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You're safe now. But Emma could see the lie in the tension of his shoulders, the way his hands trembled slightly as he knelt to embrace Lyra. This attack had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. The Crimson Court had broken through his defenses, killed his servants, turned his own guard against him. Nothing was safe anymore. Victor escaped, Emma said quietly, watching Kale's face carefully. I saw him run while you were fighting Matthias. Kale's jaw clenched, the muscle twitching with barely held back violence. I know, 2 words, but they carried the promise of death within them. He stood and began giving orders to the surviving servants who emerged from their hiding places like ghosts. Seal all entrances, except the main gate. Double the blood ward protections. Send word to the outer territories. I want every vampire in my service back at Raven's Halt within the hour. Emma watched him transform back into the cold, calculating lord she'd first met. All traces of the vulnerable father disappearing behind layers of icy control. It should have comforted her, but instead it made her stomach clench with unease. Emma. His voice cut through her thoughts. You will return to your chambers immediately. Do not leave them for any reason. Do not open the door for anyone except me. His silver eyes left no room for argument. This is not a request. You are the only person my daughter trusts. That makes you invaluable, but it also makes you a target. I will not risk your safety. Emma wanted to protest, but the bodies scattered around them made his point clear. She was human, fragile, completely defenseless against creatures who could tear her apart without effort. She nodded reluctantly, taking Lyra's hand. But as they climbed the stairs toward the bedroom wing, Emma's unease grew. Something felt wrong, incomplete. Victor hadn't just escaped. He'd escaped for a reason. The attack on Raven's Halt had been too coordinated, too well informed to be over with Matthias's death. 2 hours later, her suspicions proved correct. Emma had managed to get Lyra to sleep, the little girl exhausted from terror and the emotional toll of the morning's violence. But sleep avoided Emma. She paced the room like a caged animal, every shadow seeming to hide threats, every sound making her jump. That's when she heard voices in the hallway outside, familiar voices speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Must move tonight while Lord Kale's defenses are reorganizing. Emma pressed herself against the door, straining to listen. The voice was unmistakably Victor's, though she couldn't make out his companion. The girl will be vulnerable during the transition to the new safe house. That's our opportunity. Emma's blood turned to ice. New safe house? Kale hadn't mentioned moving Lyra anywhere. What about the human? Another voice asked, one Emma didn't recognize. She's expendable now. The princess's attachment to her served its purpose, made her predictable. Once we have the girl, the human dies. Emma's hands shook as she eased the door open just enough to peer through the crack. Victor stood in the hallway with 2 vampires she'd never seen before. Members of the Crimson Court who'd somehow gotten into the estate during the chaos. Lord, Darius wants the princess delivered to the sanctum by midnight, Victor continued. The ritual requires the new moon, and we have only one chance to complete the binding. Binding. The word sent terror shooting through Emma's veins. They weren't just planning to kidnap Lyra. They were going to use her for something far worse. She had to warn Kale. Emma eased the door shut and turned toward the connecting chamber where Lyra slept. But the little girl's bed was empty. Looking for something? Victor's voice came from behind her, cold as winter death. Emma spun around to find him standing in the doorway, holding Lyra's unconscious form in his arms. The little girl's silver hair hung limp, and her pale face was slack with unnatural sleep. What did you do to her? Emma lunged forward, but Victor's free hand caught her throat and lifted her off the ground with inhuman strength. A mild sedative. She'll sleep for hours. His grip tightened, cutting off her air supply. Long enough for us to complete our business. Emma clawed at his hand, spots dancing at the edges of her vision. Kale will kill you. Lord Kale will never find us. By the time he realizes what's happened, the princess will be bound to Lord Darius's will, and the Draven bloodline will serve the true vampire nobility. Victor's smile was sharp as broken glass. Your part in this little drama is over. Human. The last thing Emma saw before darkness claimed her was Lyra's peaceful face and the knowledge that she'd failed to protect the child who'd become her whole world. When she woke, the room was in ruins. Furniture lay scattered and broken. Deep claw marks scored the walls, and the very air seemed to vibrate with leftover fury. Kale stood in the center of the destruction, his back to her, his whole body trembling with rage so pure it was almost touchable. How long? Emma croaked, her throat raw from Victor's grip. 4 hours. Kale's voice was barely human, distorted by fangs that had extended in his fury. 4 hours since they took my daughter. Emma struggled to sit up, ignoring the pounding in her head. I heard them talking. They mentioned a sanctum, a ritual that requires the new moon. Someone named Lord Darius. Cale whirled around and Emma gasped at what she saw. His eyes burned like twin suns. His face was pale as marble, and when he spoke, his fangs glinted like silver daggers. Darius Blackthorn. I should have known. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. He seeks to bind Lyra's power to his own bloodline. Make her a weapon against me. We have to stop him. We? Cale's laugh held no humor. You are human, Emma, fragile, breakable. You will remain here where... No. Emma forced herself to stand, meeting his burning gaze with her own. Lyra trusts me. If she wakes up in a place full of strangers, she'll panic. She'll fight them. You know I'm right. Cale's expression shifted, calculation replacing some of the rage. The ritual requires her cooperation, willing or not. If she's traumatized fighting, she won't trust anyone else, Emma pressed. You've seen how she is with other people. She needs me there, Cale. You need me there. For a long moment, they stared at each other, the ancient vampire lord and the human waitress who'd stumbled into his world. Finally, Cale nodded once, sharp and decisive. Very well, but you follow my orders without question. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than any shout. Stay close to me, Emma Rodriguez. One wrong move, one moment of hesitation, and you will die alongside my enemies. Emma met his gaze without flinching. I understand, do you? Cale stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his silver eyes. Because where we're going, mercy is a luxury neither of us can afford. The Sanctum of Shadows is sacred ground to the old bloodlines. Even I will be tested there. Emma thought of Lyra's laugh, of silver eyes full of trust and wonder, of small hands reaching for soap bubbles in a world of darkness. Then we'd better not fail, she said. Cale's smile was sharp as winter and twice as cold. Indeed, because failure means more than death. Emma, it means watching my daughter become a monster. The new moon was rising, and somewhere in the darkness, a vampire princess slept in the hands of her enemies. Time was running out. The Sanctum of Shadows rose from the mist like a monument to forgotten gods. The ancient cathedral had once been a place of worship, but centuries of vampire occupation had twisted it into something darker. Gothic spires clawed at the moonless sky, and gargoyles sat along the rooflines seemed to move in Emma's peripheral vision. Stained glass windows, cracked and blackened with age, showed scenes of battles between winged figures and creatures that looked disturbingly familiar. Stay behind me, Cale whispered as they approached the massive oak doors. Do not engage anyone directly. Your only goal is to reach Lyra. Emma nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs. The bottle of bubble solution in her pocket felt both ridiculous and essential, her only weapon against the nightmare they were walking into. The doors stood slightly open, revealing glimpses of flickering candlelight within. Cale paused, his silver eyes scanning the shadows, every muscle in his body coiled like a spring. They're expecting us, he said, his voice barely audible. At least 24 vampires, maybe more. Ancient ones, can you handle that many? Cale's smile was sharp as a blade. You're about to find out what 8 centuries of existence has taught me about survival. They slipped through the doors into a scene from a medieval painting of hell. The cathedral's main hall stretched before them, lined with stone pillars that supported a vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. Candles flickered from every surface, casting dancing light across faces that belonged in nightmares. Vampires filled the space, some in modern clothing, others dressed like they'd stepped from different centuries entirely. Their eyes glowed like colored gems in the darkness, amber, silver, deep crimson, pale gold. At the altar, Lord Darius Blackthorn waited. He was tall and elegant, with silver hair that gleamed like moonlight, and eyes the color of fresh blood. Ancient power radiated from him like heat from a forge. At his feet, Lyra lay unconscious on a stone slab, her small form almost lost among the ritual tools surrounding her. Lord Cale Draven, Darius called out, his voice echoing off the stone walls. How gracious of you to join our ceremony. You arrived just in time to witness your daughter's rebirth. Emma's eyes found Victor standing beside the altar, his face smug with expected victory. The traitor wore ceremonial robes now, clearly having risen in Darius's opinion. Release her, Darius, Kale's voice carried the weight of complete authority. Your quarrel is with me. My quarrel is with the weakness you represent. Darius gestured to the assembled vampires. For too long, our kind has hidden in shadows, content to feed on scraps while humans multiply like vermin. Your daughter's power, bound to my will bring in a new age. Kale stepped forward, and Emma felt the temperature plummet. You want a new age? Let me show you one. What happened next defied everything Emma thought she knew about the laws of physics. Kale moved like darkness given form, faster than the eye could follow. One moment he stood beside Emma. The next, he was among the assembled vampires like a wolf in a flock of sheep. His hands became claws that tore through ancient flesh as if it were paper. Vampires who had survived for centuries crumbled to dust before they could even scream. Blood painted the cathedral walls in red arcs. The sound of tearing flesh and snapping bones filled the air, punctuated by Kale's inhuman roars of fury. He moved through his enemies like a force of nature, unstoppable and terrifying. Emma used the chaos to her advantage. While every eye was fixed on the carnage, she slipped along the wall toward the altar. Stone pillars provided cover as she crept closer to where Lyra lay motionless. The little girl's face was pale as marble, her breathing so shallow it was barely visible. A vampire noticed her movement and lunged, but Kale appeared like a shadow, his hand closing around the attacker's throat. The ancient creature's head separated from his shoulders with a wet sound that made Emma's stomach turn. Go, Kale snarled, his eyes burning like twin stars. Get her out of here. Emma reached the altar just as Lyra's silver eyes fluttered open. The little girl's gaze was unfocused, clouded by whatever drugs they'd given her. But when she saw Emma's face, recognition dawned. Emma. Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. I'm scared. I know, baby girl. I'm here. Emma's fingers worked at the leather straps binding Lyra to the stone slab. Everything's going to be okay. But even as she spoke, Emma could see the terror building in Lyra's eyes. The sounds of battle filled the cathedral. Screams, roars, the wet sound of bodies being torn apart. It was too much for a child who'd already witnessed her mother's murder. Lyra's breathing grew rapid and shallow. Her small body began to shake, and Emma recognized the signs of an approaching panic attack. Emma reached into her pocket and pulled out the bubble solution. Look at me, sweetheart, she whispered, unscrewing the cap with trembling fingers. Just look at me. She dipped the wand and blew gently. Bubbles rose into the air, catching the candlelight and transforming it into something magical. They floated around Lyra's face like tiny planets, their surfaces shimmering with rainbow colors that seemed to glow against the cathedral's darkness. Pretty, Lyra breathed, her panic fading as she reached out to touch the floating spheres. Emma kept blowing bubbles, creating a cloud of shimmering beauty in the midst of the hellish battle. Lyra's breathing calmed, her silver eyes focusing on the gentle dance of soap and light rather than the violence surrounding them. That's my girl, Emma whispered, finally freeing the last strap. Can you walk? Lyra nodded, sitting up on the stone altar. Emma lifted her down, keeping the bubble wand ready to create more distractions if needed. That's when Victor appeared behind them. Touching, the traitor sneered, his formal clothes now splattered with blood, the human and her pet Trix. He raised a curved dagger, its blade gleaming in the candlelight. Lord Darius may be occupied, but your usefulness has ended. The blade descended toward Emma's back, but never found its target. Kale materialized between them like a ghost made of shadow and fury. His hand caught Victor's wrist with a sound like breaking bones, stopping the dagger inches from Emma's spine. Victor Stromberg. Kale's voice was soft as falling snow and infinitely more deadly. My most trusted guard, the vampire I welcomed into my family. Victor's face went white as fresh snow. My lord, I can explain. Explain? Kale's grip tightened, and Victor screamed as his wrist shattered. Explain how you sold my daughter to our enemies? Explain how you betrayed 800 years of loyalty for Darius's promises? The dagger clattered to the floor. Kale's other hand closed around Victor's throat, lifting him off the ground with casual ease. There is no explanation, Kale whispered. There is only justice. Victor's body crumbled to ash, scattering in the cathedral's cold air like gray snow. Behind them, Lord Darius's voice cut through the sudden silence. "Impressive, old friend, but you're too late." Emma turned to see Darius standing over a circle carved into the stone floor, his hands glowing with dark energy. The ritual wasn't over. It had only just begun. "The new moon reaches its peak," Darius continued, his red eyes fixed on Lyra. "With or without ceremony, the binding will be complete. Your daughter's power will be mine." Dark energy began to spiral toward Lyra, seeking to wrap around her small form like chains made of shadow. But as the first tendrils touched her skin, something unexpected happened. Lyra looked at Emma, her silver eyes bright with trust and love, and smiled. "Bubbles," she said clearly. "More bubbles, please." And in that moment, Emma understood. The binding required fear, trauma, the very darkness that had consumed Lyra for 3 years. But Emma had given her something else: hope, joy, the simple magic of soap spheres floating in candlelight. Light conquered darkness, and Darius's spell shattered like glass. The spell's destruction sent shockwaves through the cathedral that brought down centuries-old stones. Darius staggered backward, his red eyes wide with disbelief as dark energy scattered around him like smoke. "Impossible," he breathed. "The binding cannot be broken by mortal means." Cale stepped forward, his silver eyes blazing with triumph and deadly intent. "You underestimated the power of something you've never known. Darius, love." Emma held Lyra close as the little girl giggled at the soap bubbles still floating around them, completely unaware of the supernatural forces that had just tried to claim her. The contrast was startling. Innocence and joy existing in the heart of an ancient place of darkness. "This isn't over, Draven," Darius snarled, but his voice held the hollow ring of defeat. "The old bloodlines will never accept your human pet." Cale moved faster than Emma's eyes could follow. One moment Darius was standing at the altar. The next, he was nothing but ash settling on the cathedral floor. The Vampire King's fury had finally found its target. Silence fell over the ruined cathedral like a heavy blanket. The surviving members of the Crimson Court had fled into the night, leaving only Cale's loyal vampires standing among the wreckage. Emma realized that reinforcements had arrived during the battle, dozens of vampires bearing the Draven crest, their eyes glowing with respect and fierce loyalty as they looked at their lord. "My lord," one of them said, bowing deeply. "The estate is secure. All traitors have been eliminated," Cale nodded, his gaze finding Emma and Lyra. The burning fury was fading from his silver eyes, replaced by something softer, but no less intense. "Good. See to the wounded." Emma carried Lyra toward the cathedral's entrance, desperate to escape the scent of blood and ash that filled the air. Her legs felt weak with exhaustion and leftover terror, but Lyra's warm weight in her arms kept her moving forward. The night air was cool and clean after the stuffiness of the cathedral. Emma sank onto the stone steps, finally allowing herself to breathe properly. Lyra curled against her chest, one small hand still clutching the bubble wand. "Emma," the little girl whispered sleepily. "Are we going home now?" Home. The word hit Emma like a physical blow. Where was home for her now? Her tiny apartment above the used bookstore? The late-night shifts at Mel's restaurant? That life felt like something from another century, something that had happened to a different person entirely. "Yes, baby girl," Emma said softly, stroking Lyra's platinum hair. "We're going home." Cale emerged from the cathedral, his imposing figure outlined against the flickering candlelight within. Blood still stained his clothes, and his hair was wild from battle, but he moved with the controlled grace Emma had come to recognize. Behind him, his followers streamed out into the night, vampires who had served the Draven bloodline for decades or centuries. They formed a semicircle around the cathedral steps, their glowing eyes fixed on Cale with the devotion usually reserved for gods or kings. Emma suddenly felt very small and very human in their presence. Cale descended the steps slowly, his silver gaze never leaving Emma's face. When he reached them, he knelt beside her, his cold fingers gently touching Lyra's cheek. The little girl smiled in her half-sleep, unconsciously leaning into her father's touch. You saved her, Cale said quietly. You saved us both. Emma met his eyes, seeing emotions there she couldn't name. She saved herself. The bubbles just reminded her that there's still beauty in the world. Cale's hand moved to cup Emma's face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with surprising tenderness. You gave her that. You gave her hope when I had none left to offer. The assembled vampires watched in complete silence, but Emma could feel the weight of their attention like a physical presence. These ancient creatures were witnessing something they'd probably never seen before. Their lord showing such vulnerability, such humanity. Cale stood, turning to face his followers. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of 8 centuries of rule, but underneath it was something Emma had never heard from him before: genuine warmth. Tonight, you have seen courage that puts our immortal strength to shame, Cale announced, his words echoing off the cathedral walls. This woman risked everything to protect what matters most to me. She asked for nothing in return, expected no reward, yet she stood against forces that would terrify. Warriors 1,000 years her senior. Emma's cheeks burned as dozens of glowing eyes turned to her with something that looked suspiciously like respect. From this night forward, Cale continued, his voice growing stronger. Emma Rodriguez is under my protection. She is no longer merely human. She is family. She is Draven. The announcement sent shockwaves through the assembled vampires, but none dared to object. Emma felt the world shift around her, understanding with crystal clarity that Cale wasn't just thanking her. He was claiming her, binding her to his world and his bloodline in ways that went far deeper than marriage or adoption. My lord, Emma started to protest, but Cale's silver eyes silenced her. The choice is yours, he said softly, his voice meant for her alone. You can return to your old life, and I will ensure you're never bothered by our kind again. Or, he paused, or you can stay. Help me raise my daughter. Stand beside me as we rebuild what was destroyed tonight. His expression grew vulnerable, in a way that made her chest tight. I won't lie to you, Emma. This world is dangerous. There will be other enemies, other battles, but there will also be family, purpose, and power beyond anything you've ever imagined. Emma looked down at Lyra, who had fallen completely asleep in her arms, the bubble wand still clutched in her small fist. The little girl's face was peaceful for the first time since Emma had known her, free from the nightmares that had haunted her for 3 years. Then she looked up at Cale, seeing past the vampire lord to the father who had nearly lost everything tonight, the man who had trusted her with his most precious possession, and watched her prove worthy of that trust. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, with the first hints of dawn, painting the cathedral's Gothic spires in shades of gold and rose. Somewhere in the distance, a bird began to sing. Emma Rodriguez had been a waitress 12 hours ago. She'd served coffee to truck drivers and counted tips in a restaurant that smelled of grease and broken dreams. That woman felt like a stranger now. I'll stay, she said, her voice steady despite the size of the decision. We'll stay. Cale's smile was like sunrise after an endless night. Beautiful, rare, and worth every moment of darkness that had come before. As dawn broke over the ancient cathedral, Emma realized she was no longer just a waitress who had stumbled into a vampire's world. She was the woman who had blown bubbles in the darkness, and in doing so, had softened the heart of a vampire king himself. Some love stories begin with a first glance across a crowded room. This one began with soap bubbles and a little girl's tears, and would be written in moonlight and shadow for all the centuries to come.